Thank you once again for Joey Coleman to come on to the 905er. I think this is your third time on the podcast, third or fourth. We'll have to check the archives for that. But thank you, Joey, for coming on to talk Hamilton / provincial politics with for today. Thank you, Joey, for taking the time.
Pleasure to be here. You gentlemen have been producing some great episodes in the last few months. I'm a regular listener. So, you know,
Thank you.
regular
Thank you.
listener, not first time caller.
Well, the reason that we wanted to have you on was you wrote we thought a very excellent opinion piece on your website, thepublicrecord.ca, concerning Hamilton Centre's MPP, Sarah Jama. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty, but to give our listeners a bit of a refresher. As everyone knows, Israel and Palestine are once again in conflict, and there's horrendous actions by Hamas previously. Sarah Jama took to Twitter to issue a statement that many interpreted as being pro-Palestine in its content, to the point that the Conservative Party, the Progressive Conservative Party, has jumped on that as a theme now in the legislature. Going so far as accusing Sarah Jama of endorsing the rape and murder of Israeli citizens. To that end, without getting too complicated, it's culminated in the fact that the Conservatives are now threatening to ask the Speaker to not recognize Ms. Jama when she enters the chamber in her duties as an MPP for Hamilton Centre. Joey, you wrote an excellent op-ed piece. I'm not going to paraphrase you since you're right here. Why don't you just tell our listeners what your point was with the piece, please?
Well, the simplest explanation is it's not the place of the government to judge Sarah Jama's speech. That is the role of the voters of Hamilton Centre. And it's an inappropriate use of government power to attempt to silence her. And for the Conservatives who wrap themselves in free expression when it's convenient to them to now do this undermines the principle of free expression. You can have an opinion on Ms. Jama's statement. She's a politician. That's the nature of politics. People have opinions. The Conservatives can issue the statements that they have, some of which Ms. Jama plans to take them to court over, is threatening to take them to court over. So we're in the politics of that. And it's fine for the Conservative Party to make whatever statements it wishes to have. It is not appropriate for the Conservative government to use governmental power and governmental authority to silence a duly elected member of the Legislative Assembly. And again, in Canada, we don't have absolute free expression. Randy Hillier is the example where we have had a member of provincial parliament not recognized before. The key there was that all the parties agreed not to recognize him. There was unanimous agreement of the House. There is not unanimous agreement here. This is politics. This is theater. And it's gone too far. We can definitely discuss the fact that, for the Conservatives, as many of my colleagues that are working at Queen's Park have stated, this is the political distraction they want from the Greenbelt issue. And so they're doing that. And for the NDP, this is a challenging matter where the NDP leader asked a member of her caucus to do something, and that member has not taken down the post like the leader asked. And so this is a distraction for the NDP from what they want to be talking about as well, because members of the press gallery are rightfully asking the questions of what's going on here. Why have you as leader not able to lead your party in this manner? And that gets to another level of politics. But my primary statement and interest in this is related to the principle of free expression, that Ms. Jama is duly elected. She represents the people of Hamilton Centre, and she does so with a voice in provincial parliament that she uses as she sees fit. And in 2026, the voters of Hamilton East get to decide upon that.
I really liked your article because, as I tend to like articles that manage to say in a very articulate way exactly what I was thinking. That may be, you know, confirmation bias or whatever, but I felt it was, when I saw what the PCs were doing, I kind of couldn't quite believe it. I couldn't believe my own eyes, because regardless of what I happen to think, and you can read my Twitter account, I don't post very much on Twitter these days, but the one thing I did post was that I thought Sarah Jama's statement was disgraceful in how it. Well, let's not go into it, but I you know, I have sympathy with all kinds of people in the Middle East crisis, and I felt that statement was all kinds of out of line. But there's a massive difference between saying I strongly dislike what that person has just said, and saying that a duly elected member of a legislature in a democracy should be silenced by the government, not just by I mean, like you say, in an extreme case, perhaps where you've got unanimity of MPPs, as in the Hillier case, perhaps then you know, there's a way in which it can be done. But for a one political party to say we don't agree with you, therefore we're gonna in effect take away your job as an MPP, I felt was truly disgraceful, and I kind of was disappointed in how little prominence this is actually received in, say, the Toronto Star or the other sort of major newspapers. It's like, surely this is something that journalists should jump all over the minute they see it. Is that kind of, does that sort of tally with any of your opinions, Joey?
As somebody who has worked for national publications, who has been at Queen's Park covering a specific beat, so not covering Queen's Park, but covering higher education and regularly at Queen's Park scrumming related to that, I get why this is a news story. You've got to fill the news hole, and you've got to put words between ads. And this is actually a legitimate political story. You have the leader of the official opposition instructing a member of her caucus to take direction, and that member not taking it. This also has the potential of developing into a longer story arc. And one of the challenges is in journalism is that if you're not giving people the story as it's developing, it becomes very hard for you to go back and explain how we got where we were without being able to go, here's the story of that. And there's many ways that this could go for the NDP. And remember that we also cover the opposition as government in waiting. The idea of the opposition having opposition critics is to say, this person could become the Minister of Education. This person could become the Minister of Community Services. And if the government in waiting is severely divided in this manner, that's news. And then it's dominating question period. And it has to be reminded that there's journalists out there doing the beat coverage, still covering the Greenbelt, covering transportation, covering Metrolinx. So I do not fault the members of the press gallery for covering a ongoing political drama that's potentially going to court.
I absolutely think they should cover it. That wasn't what I was suggesting. I was suggesting that I was surprised how little coverage the issue of an executive, a government wishing to silence a duly elected politician unilaterally, not with cross-party support, but unilaterally. I felt that crossed all manner of lines, and that as that the media should be, as you were, you know, very vocal about how that crosses lines, because, you know, I may disagree with something with, and I do disagree with what Ms Jama said, and I think it needed a much more fulsome apology than the one she gave. But you know, I will defend to my last breath her right as a duly elected MPP to sit in the legislature and to speak as that MPP. So that was kind of the point I was getting at there. That you know, not that I think that this shouldn't be covered. I'd like to see more of how extraordinary it is for a government to suggest that an MPP be silenced.
If I could just jump in there, I don't. I don't think this is out of the norm of this government. We have seen this government use the notwithstanding clause for, I would argue, relatively minor things, such as the reorganization of Toronto City Council, uh, in one of the first acts that Doug Ford did when he took office. So this isn't outside of that line of behavior, in my humble opinion. This is kind of in line with, let's use a sledgehammer when maybe a scalpel or a bit more finesse should be applied. That being said, I do wonder, but maybe we're now onto the fact that Ms. Jama is looking to take legal action against Doug Ford, as she's declared. I don't think, in my last check, nothing has actually been filed, but she has threatened to sue Doug Ford for libel action. Is this just a case with this story is moving so fast that it's hard for journalists just to keep up and kind of take a breath and say, where are we in this?
I'll go with two paths on this. One, it is moving quickly. And we do not have the number of Queen's Park columnists that we used to have. So that's the first part. The second part is that when the means of publications were limited, the thinkers, the people who are tweeting, used to have to submit an op-ed to the newspaper. So when you opened your newspaper in the 1990s, you would have 4 or 5 columns every day of smart people, and 1 or 2 of those would be taking the viewpoint along the lines of where I was going. So those viewpoints are being expressed on Twitter, on blogs, on Substack, but we don't really have a curation that we used to have with the physical newspaper. And so that's the two paths I would go on it. The story is going to continue. If there's a legal filing, you'll see analysis pieces discussing the merits of the case. And do recall that the premier made the comments that Ms Jama is threatening libel over outside of the Legislative Assembly. And quickly, if I was to start outlining an analysis of that, which hopefully your listeners will find interesting, remember that Ontario has some of the strongest protections for political expression in North America. The Ontario Courts Act SLAP section, Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. It would be fascinating to see the courts have to decide SLAP between 2 politicians. And it's, I mean, I would have to see her statement of claim. I would have to spend more time thinking about it, but you're going to see more of that. And this is why right now the assignment editors are saying to their reporters at Queen's Park, follow the JAMA issue because it's new news.
Yeah.
The Greenbelt's still important news, but it's old news right now.
Well, let's kind of, that's kind of what I want to take a look at, if we can, is that for a while in Ontario news, the Greenbelt, and bring in specifically here to 905, recently there was talk in Hamilton of exactly the White Belt opening of land, how that was working out. Now it's starting to get a light shone on that as well. Then the attack by Hamas in Israel happened, and pretty much everything in the news world focused on the Middle East, as is the case. Now, in my take is, I don't give a hoot what the Hamilton Centre MPP thinks about the Middle East at the provincial level. It is just, that is not the person I'm turning to figure, like, I need a nuanced approach to this. It's just not that's why we have a division of powers. I'm questioning, from a political standpoint, is Merritt Stiles kind of losing the plot on this? She was hammering Doug Ford on Greenbelt issues, environmental protections, land deals, and whatnot. And within 1 week, we've lost that plot. She is now on the defensive. She's got to deal with Sarah Jama's behavior. As you said, the legal proceedings might have a whole new different dynamic to this story, to the point where you say, can she get it back and start hammering Doug Ford again on the issues of the Greenbelt, which was really kind of her, she was starting to shine as leader of the opposition on that file.
So for the NDP, I'll talk about NDP governments in a three-party system, which is what we have. We have three primary parties. We have the Green Party with the seat in the House, but they're not yet competing for government. So, and I do not want to diminish the Green Party's merits, but we are still at a three-party system. It's an interesting challenge that the NDP has in these three-party systems. Bob Rae wrote about this in his memoirs. Graham Steele, who was the Minister of Finance in the first Nova Scotia NDP government, wrote about this in his political memoir, that the NDP in a three-party system has two factions. They have a very vocal activist faction, which is the smaller of the two, and then they have the traditional Union Social Democrat wing of the party, which tends to end up electing the leader. The leader tends to come from there. And it's a challenging coalition for the NDP to keep together. And so you have Sarah Jama, who comes from that strong activist on the ground wing of the party, and the Leader Stiles, who comes from that traditional Union Social Democrat side. And the tension that occurs between them, and the challenge that the NDP has when they're governing, is that they tend to be criticized the government from the left. And we're seeing that dynamic occurring right now, where a strong set of the NDP activist wing is very vocal about issues and very engaged and very willing to challenge their leader very publicly. We saw that at the Federal Leadership Convention this last weekend in Hamilton. And so, yes, for Stiles, she's now having that NDP tension playing out in a public arena. And that's what people focus on. That's what we're talking about right now, because that is front and center. And we'll see where that goes. I don't know how the NDP, I don't know how the NDP reconciles that. If people want to read Mr. Ray's book and Mr. Steele's book, they go much further into this in a much more elaborate and informed way than I can.
It reminds me a little bit of the parallels with the British Labour Party are notable in that similar tension between the social democratic wing, which is the only wing that's ever formed government over there, rightly or wrongly, or fortunately or unfortunately or otherwise, it's just a fact, and the radical socialist side. And I sort of appreciate the sort of division in my own feelings. We've spoken, Joel and I have spoken on this podcast multiple times about wishing that MPPs were more free to express their own opinions, and less tied to party whips. And yet when an MPP clearly shows that they could care less about, or couldn't care less about, the party whip or the instructions of their leader, and is just going to do what they want to do, I'm immediately, oh, this is terrible. This undermines the leader. Is clearly weak. The leader needs to do something about it. They can't be undermined in this way. I'm not sure how we're ever going to square that circle when the people who talk about the news, such as myself, want to have a cake and eat it too, very often with this kind of situation. Probably not the sort of area you want to go into expressing an opinion on, but do you think Marit Stiles should have taken a firmer line on this and saying, like, I said, you have to apologize, you have to retract, and instead you've just pinned it to the top of your Twitter account with a kind of semi-apology? Is that good enough? From the point of view of the leader, is that good enough?
Well, so the leader chose to say that she expected her member to apologize and retract. The leader created that part of the dynamic. And so for me, as somebody who is analyzing that, I go, okay, so the leader said that. She laid down that is her line, directing a member of her caucus who has decided not to do that. And Miss Stiles has got herself in a dilemma because she tried to enforce a discipline. The member decided not to, and we're now at an impasse. And that begs the question of, well, what does she do? And she's got to make a choice here. She did have the option to, for example, take a less definitive direction to her member. She had the option to say what she's saying now, which is the member understands the federal NDP position. The party's position provincially is the same as the NDP, and we understand where our member is coming from on this issue. But that's not what Stiles said initially. And that's where Stiles framed the debate of her leadership on this matter. And that's where the media has been asking her questions is this good enough? And the pinning the tweet to the profile gave the media it gave everybody the new question of, oh, this is continuing. It was still news.
Well,
Sorry,
I was going to say it's going to be problematic down the road for the NDP, just from an impartial analyst point of view, I suppose, in that what they want to get back to is hammering Doug Ford on the Greenbelt scandal. As more details of that keep coming to light, it's going to be a bigger and bigger story. For a while, Merritt Stiles was leading the charge on that, and to great acclaim and much for her benefit politically. If she loses that, because now she has to deal with Sarah Jama disciplining her essentially in public, as you said, she's kind of made this a front page story almost. The question is who now takes up the Greenbelt charge. We know that there are many activist groups out there who are pushing for more dirt. There's journalists such as the Narwhal, which kind of broke the story. They're not going to let that go. We know that for sure. And I would argue that the Liberal Party, the Ontario Liberal Party, is going to have a leadership convention in a couple of weeks, and they'll decide a new leader. And I imagine whoever he or she might be is going to be bringing this to the front. And the last thing you want is to give this as an issue for the Liberals to hammer Doug Ford on and take charge of that anger in Ontario. And that's just that's the way I see it. I don't see that's how I see the next few months playing out, and it's all the NDP's making.
Yeah, it's hard to say where our politics goes in a few weeks. At the end of the day, political parties need to be talking about the issues that matter to a large swath of voters, and that they can put a coalition together upon, because the goal of a political party is to enact policy that's aligned with the party. And in order to do that, you have to be in government or in a supply and confidence agreement in a minority government. And so the NDP all the parties are going to have to be talking about issues that are going to matter in 2026. And I make a heck of a lot more money if I had a crystal ball. As a journalist, of course, I'm always trying to figure out what are the issues that are coming, because I need to be prepared. What I will say is that, and we're starting to see this in our federal politics, it always comes back to bread and butter issues and what people experience each and every day. And the Greenbelt scandal will continue because there's the RCMP investigation. Environmental defense and eco-justice have numerous court cases going on and in continuing discovery in those. There will be some developer who decides to sue some developer who decides to sue the provincial government for their lost unearned profits, which will keep the scandal going. The opposition parties need to determine how to keep that issue and the government on its back heels, but also how to present themselves as a government is in waiting. And turning to what Roland had said earlier, I think the public is mature enough to have a party where there's a diverse set of ideas, diverse in the sense of many ideas, and that there's members who speak their mind. That the question for people becomes, is this a government that's able to move things forward? And that's the challenge for the leader, is that the leader is seen to have miscalculated, because her statement has now created new legs to this matter. And you're both correct where we discussed the NDP would want to be talking about the government and why Ontarians should not have confidence in this government, in their opinion. And instead, they're talking about an internal caucus matter that is playing out in public.
Yeah, I see that we're coming up on our time here. Joy, I know you have another errand to get to, so I do not want to be the reason that you are late. So I'm going to say let's wrap it up there for this episode. I imagine the story is not going to be going away quietly anytime soon, so we'll see how that unfolds. Joy, thank you very much for coming on and having a chat today.
Thank you, guys. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, guys, have a good one.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks, Joey.